Good evening. In Efir, the evening news from Ostankino. Exactly 1 hour ago, the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, addressed by way of television the citizens of the Russian Federation in connection with the most serious power crisis in the country. Pursuant to the decree of the President, which has already been signed, starting today, I disband the judicial, instructional, controlling functions of the Council of People's Deputies and of the Supreme Soviet of the Russian Federation. The meetings of the Council will not be further convened. The powers of the national deputies of the Russian Federation will cease. Of course, their labor rights will be fully guaranteed. The deputies are within their rights to return to the enterprises and institutions where they worked prior to having been elected deputies of Russia, to occupy their former posts. At the same time, each is again within his right to submit his candidacy for elections of the Federal Assembly. The President of the Russian Federation, in his decree, has indicated that amendments and addendums to the current constitution exist. The higher organs of the legislative power will be the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, with the two-house parliament functioning on a professional basis. The elections for the Federal Assembly are set for the 11th and 12th of December this year. The address of the President, Boris Yeltsin, to the citizens of Russia will again be broadcasted at the end of our program. As Interfox conveyed at these moments in the House of the Soviets of the Russian Federation, a press conference is being prepared of the chairman of the Supreme Soviet, Ruslan Hasbulatov. Today in Kiev, the 8th session of the Supreme Soviet of Ukraine began its work. From its first day, the observers had waited and asked how parliamentarians will react to the President Leonid Kuchma's request to resign. This morning in Kiev, the city, it reminds one of a city preparing for a military parade. The central streets are blocked by technology and military personnel who, judging from their military garb, are members of the Red Units who guard civil order. And as a Speaker of Parliament later admitted that by a demonstration of force, the deterrent is posed to ward off any potential protest or clash and even a seize of the building of the Supreme Soviet. The picketers by the walls of the Parliament building were very numerous today, and judging by their slogans, they were quite aggressively prepared. Young people from Ukraine's national self-defense movement. Having defined the priorities and the questions of the agenda of the session, the deputies first began to examine the question of the announcement of the Premier Leonid Kuchma regarding resignation. In his farewell address, Leonid Danilovich admitted that his government was not able to divert the oncoming economic catastrophe in the country, and part of the blame he placed on Parliament. And he himself said that he worked honestly from the very beginning, knowing that he had headed a government which was doomed. President Kravchuk accepted the resignation of the Prime Minister, but during a secret vote later, the deputies expressed opposition to the resignation of Premier Leonid Kuchma, and so ended the first day of the session of the Supreme Soviet of Ukraine. At the evening session, the deputies renewed the discussion of the question and decided not only to satisfy the request of Leonid Kuchma to be relieved from the duties as a Prime Minister, but also expressed mistrust to the entire body of the Cabinet of Ministers and appealed to the President Kravchuk to form a new body of government. Abkhazian formations all day did not cease their efforts to penetrate the center of Sukhumia. So was information received from Interfox based on information from the Press Center of Defense of Georgia. The situation in Sukhumia is critical. However, Georgian troops are currently exercising restraint. The announcement is also denied that Abkhaz has taken control of Sukhumi radio and television towers. The Ministry of Defense of Abkhazia says that the Georgian army, for the first time in the last days of conflict, has implemented military aviation. 2 bombers, Su-25, have launched bomb attacks on the populated quadrants of Sukhumi, which have come under the control of Abkhaz forces. The war in Abkhazia is acquiring a more brutal and intense nature. The fighting in Sukhumia is conducted in the suburbs. On the Lyshkovsk plateau, the elevation near the city, the Abkhaz troops were held back by another few hundred meters. The situation has intensified regarding evacuation. The airport, as of this night, is being fired at more intensely. The Abkhaz side has shut down a civilian plane en route from Sochi to Sukhumi. 4 crew members have died, 21 passengers. These are the new victims of the war. Edward Shevardnadze Shevardnadze has stated that he will remain in Sukhumi until the very last moment. This evening, the list of casualties has reached almost 100 people. More than 60 people are injured. There's a catastrophic shortage of medications. All of Sukhumi is literally living in basements. Today, in the Republic, discussion surrounds the letter of the Speaker of Parliament of Georgia, Vakhstan Guguadze, who says in his letter, Georgia must enter the CIS. Expressing support for this on behalf of their local residents are the administrations of Kartagali and the city of Sukhumi. According to exact details, the plane Tu-134 from Sochi to Sukhumi was hit at 16:30 by a heat missile from an Afghaz military carrier while descending in the Sukhumi airport. The six crew members on board and 21 passengers died, including a 3-month-old infant. All perished. As stated on television, the Georgian Minister of Defense, Georgi Karkarashvili, has said that among the Afghaz formations and in all of the Northern Caucasus, there is not a sufficient arsenal as what has fallen on Sukhumi and Ochimchir. Georgi Karkarashvili feels, so reports the agency post factum, that the arsenal to Afghaz has been from the stock of the Russian army. Today in Tbilisi, an anonymous group shot at a vehicle of the border troops of the Russian Federation. The result was that out of the 5 people in the vehicle, 1 sergeant, Vitaly Kazachenko, was killed and 3 other people were injured, so reported Interfax. And earlier, in the beginning of the morning, the Lieutenant Commander Vladimir Ragal and Major Oleg Biskaravainy of the border troops of the Ministry of Defense of Russia, posted in the beyond the Caucasus region of Tbilisi, were seized by an armed group in the center of the capital of Georgia. Interfax says that a version is being circulated that the measure was accomplished by some special service of the Republic as a retaliation. In the investigative solitary unit of Krasnodar for several months, several employees of the intelligence service of Georgia are being detained by Russian colleagues who seized them in Sochi in the course of a routine special mission. The Ministry of the Internal Defense of Russia said today that the decisive process in connection with the seizing of 2 Russian officers in Georgia and called the Georgian authorities to immediately take all measures to free them. Today at approximately 13 hours and 30 minutes, Russia completely closed the border with Abkhazia. Interfax reports that this has been by an order given by the head of the administration of the city, Adler, who himself received the order from the heads of the Krasnodarsk region. In Azerbaijan, as of the 22nd of September, the situation of the state of emergency will have ended. The decision was made by Majlis of Azerbaijan at the meeting late Monday evening. The parliament also stated support for entering the CIS. It is expected that the documents reflecting this will be signed by the head of the Republic, Gaydar Aliyev, at a scheduled meeting of the heads of the Republic in Moscow on the 24th of September. We hope that our efforts in controlling the Azerbaijan-Armenian people's conflict will give results, so said the acting president and the chairman of the Supreme Soviet of Azerbaijan, Gaydar Aliyev, at today's meeting of the Interparliamentary Assembly of Delegations of the CIS, chaired by the chairman of the Supreme Soviet of Kyrgyzstan, Sherem Kulov. It visited the 10 villages of refugees from the occupied parts of Azerbaijan and has engaged in talks with the heads of Nagorno-Karabakh. Both sides have expressed hope that the results of the meetings will be certain agreements that will be attained and realistic steps will be taken to achieve a long-lasting peace in the region. At a press conference later, the heads of the delegation said that the head of Nagorno-Karabakh proposed from the 5th of October to extend the truce for 1 more month. However, on the withdrawal of Armenian troops from the occupied Azerbaijani territories, as is concretely confirmed in the 2 resolutions of the Defense Council, no comment was made. The refugees could return home today, said Sherem Kulov, but the occupied territories would continue to be controlled by Nagorno-Karabakh as previously. Divisions of the Committee of the National Defense of Tajikistan, with the support of the Russian border troops, continue the operation in the bordering Shartukh region, where almost 1 week ago from Afghan territory, a group of Tajik opposition invaded, numbering approximately 890 people. Also in use are heavy military equipment and aviation technology. Itartas reports that after a clash with the border troops, the invaders lost almost 20 men and dispersed in small groups into difficult-to-access crevices. the Afghan port Sherhan Bandar. Through it, once a week, from camps located in the province Kunduz, on barges and cater ships, refugees are returning to Tajikistan. 9 months ago, fleeing the fratricidal war with only a few belongings, with entire families, they crossed the border river Pyansk, hoping that in Afghanistan they would find their pursuit of peace. However, they found neither peace nor ease. Having tasted the difficulties in settling, the foreigners yearned for home. The central government and local authorities, one must give them credit, are doing all they can in the given economic circumstances with the help of the United Nations to resettle the refugees who are returning to their former domiciles. One must add that through the passage points of Nizhny Pyansk, the port Heraton, and others, to the Republic have returned more than 38,000 refugees. In Afghanistan, however, there are still 30,000 citizens of Tajikistan. The cabinet minister of Kazakhstan at a closed session today ratified the agreement to unite the monetary systems of Kazakhstan and Russia. The Prime Minister Sergei Tereshchenko and the head of the National Bank of Kazakhstan have been instructed to sign the correlating agreement in Moscow. 15%. This is the general decrease in productivity. As the main culprit is recognized the sharp deficit of oil and gas, which has crippled most of all the large volume user industries. Among them is the tractor factory. Today there took place a meeting of the Scientific Association, which unites the most major industries of the Republic. Invited to the meeting was the Prime Minister of Belarus, Vyacheslav, who noted that among the many mistakes, the basic was the absence of flexibility in relations with partners from other republics. But the cardinal question was the economic union within the framework of the CIS. The Premier said we draw closer to it by establishing a unified monetary system with Russia, with which Belarus will not lose its sovereignty, but will have it defended. No proof is needed. The economy is breaking through all the borders. Therefore, it is not time to erect a new Berlin Wall. Also, Vyacheslav stated that the Soviet ministers has unanimously supported the removal in the near future of all tariff borders with Russia. The statement of the head of the Industrial Association of Belarus led to the adopting of an appeal to the Supreme Soviet of Belarus to expedite the decision to strengthen the economic integration of all CIS countries, and also to the Parliament of Russia to expedite the signing of the document to unite the monetary systems of Belarus and Russia. According to certain facts, the national debt of the Bank of Moldova today is at 27 billion rubles. And the reason for this is explained as being that after the recall from circulation by the Russian government of banknotes with Soviet symbols in the Republic, a deficit of currency was created in the Republic. As a result, many people are not being paid for 2 or 3 months. Therefore, the Moldavian banknotes with the face value of 5 Moldavian units are in very short supply today. The mentioned banknote is in use and is considered to have the value of 5,000 rubles. And this is the national currency. And when will the national currency be completely introduced? We needed to create necessary economic conditions to issue it by the end of this year. The national deputies of the Russian Federation, Oleg Basilashvili, in an interview to Itartas, said that he was offended by the Saturday's hurling of accusations by Ruslan Khasbulatov against the president. And as a citizen of Russia, to the depth of his heart, he is wounded by the tone with which the so-called scholar of economy permits himself to speak to Russians. When he, in reference to the president, who is supported by the majority of the population of Russia, says such insults. Yelena Bona, the widow of the scientist Andrei Sakharov, has commented on the statement of Ruslan Khasbulatov as being outside the guidelines of cultural behavior. Today, at a meeting of the Russian Academy of Sciences, the president of the alumni, Osipov, called it undignified for a member of the Academy and a member of Parliament to make such statements about the president of the country. A boycott of the session of the Supreme Soviet, chaired by Ruslan Khasbulatov, was called for today at a press conference by the representatives of the Coalition of Reform. The statement of the group of deputies followed the speech of the Speaker at the Assembly of the Soviets of all levels. Boris Zolotukhin, who, appearing before journalists, as only the release of the Supreme Soviet can be the way out of this political situation. In his opinion, Khasbulatov is the only obstacle on the path of constructive dialogue between the branches of government. Georgy Zadonsky concludes that the Supreme Soviet is not a parliament, but the party of Khasbulatov. The Supreme Soviet has politically and morally disintegrated. Therefore, we are obliged to announce this publicly. The representatives of the Parliamentary Coalition of Reform condemn the practice of discrediting innuendos and the uncensored battle between the two branches of government. The Prosecutor General of Russia informed the head of the government of Russia, Russian Federation, Viktor Chernomyrdin, that in the course of corruption investigations, they have found no basis for allegations made against the first Vice Premier, Vladimir Shumeyka. The Press Secretary, the first Vice Premier, said that Shumeyka will resume his post immediately after the corresponding decree of the President will be issued, which can be expected in the very near future. On the resumed case in the sessions of the Government Commission on Emergency Situations, the judges overruled the appeal of government accusers who demanded that the procedure be delayed until the legality of the current core of the Military Tribunal Supreme Court of Russia could be examined. The court noted that the prosecuting attorney's appeal is not competent in essence, since the statement of the government accusers that members of the military tribunal were in their time not elected by the Supreme Soviet does not reflect reality. Hearings will continue tomorrow. The battle with street crime is the theme of a briefing at the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs. It seems that soon we will leave our homes only in the case of emergency. Of the 2 million crimes committed this year, 350,000 were committed on the streets. Contemporary gangsters don't bother themselves with the question your life or your money, because they take both. The militia, despite the fact that they cannot be accused of a shortage of staff, is going into the offensive. Prophylactic operations, for instance, the Operation Signal, in protecting the law, which launch raids on airports and stations, reap, as a rule, a rich harvest of narcotics and armaments, as well as expensive stolen items, thus stopping the careers of the possessors. The patrol post service is being strengthened and at the expense of local budgets. All large cities have ammunition, but crime is growing as if by yeast. Through trapping social resources, society has grown accustomed to alcoholism, pretending to ignore vagrants and addicts, who often appear in underground passages and often commit serious crimes. In the Ministry of Internal Affairs, there is no positive prognosis. They're speaking with remorse about the still transparent border of Russia. They remember the ridiculed former DND and consider that the citizens' groups were an important factor. For example, this is the practice of collective self-defense, which is practiced in many other countries. The Ministry of Internal Affairs is certain that the time has come to plug up the holes in the crime code. It has worked out a project for the law on social order and the stiffening of sentences for hooliganism and possession of weapons. The package of proposals is sent to the Soviet of Ministers. As of October the 1st, movement through the downtown of part of Moscow will be prohibited for trucks weighing more than a ton from the hours of 8 to 1900, except for Saturday, Sunday, and holidays. This does not apply to vehicles under the jurisdiction of the militia, ambulance services, Moscows, or other specified organizations who may be identified by their own recognizable signs. During the next few days, the strike in the Moscow metro is not predicted, although the intervals in the movement of trains may increase. This will not happen. This will not happen, said Interfax, if the labor arbitrator who has begun talks Monday between the administration and the operators of the Metropolitan will not find a bargain satisfactory to the operators. The latter leaves itself the option of following instructions strictly, which could mean refusing to operate the trains with even minor technical disrepair or any violations in the composition of locomotives or wagons, which usually is not attended to. This could mean double intervals between the trains on all Moscow metro lines. As Interfax has reported, the Baltic Sea Ship Center said that the Marine Rescue Center in Falmouth, Great Britain, has denied requests for a military airplane in pursuit of the search mission for the bodies of the sailors of the cargo ship Polyesk, which was shipwrecked on the 17th of September in the South Atlantic. The search is continued by the Russian ship Novoplav 4 and the Georgian tanker General Bagration, which incidentally is asking to be excused from the mission because of an engine malfunction. Cambodia will be a monarchy again. This is a new project of the Constitution which is being examined, and today in Parliament it will become effective on the 24th of September, when it will be signed by the future monarch Narogom Sinaum. The warring sides in the Bosnian conflict are like never before close to reaching peace accord. This was the description of the status of the talks given by the co-chairman of the conflict in Yugoslavia, Lord Owen. He expressed hope that the Parliament of Bosnian Muslims will ratify the new peace plan. The European community will resume talks with the United States on the farming agricultural aspects of the talks in the framework of the General Agreement on Trade. At a session of the EC in Brussels today, the observers feel that this will allow the opportunity to avoid a general crisis within the community. In Managua, this is the first day of the general civil strike of bus and taxi drivers. 4 people have been injured and 25 arrested. The strikers are seeking lower gas prices and the abolishment of taxes for vehicle permits. A powerful bomb was discovered tonight by the police in Italy on the train en route from Palermo to Rome. Information which tipped off the police came from Italian secret services, who will not reveal the source of the information. From this building on the Vyšehrad street, where the Czech Ministry of Justice is located, a scandalous weave has been given concern for local corridors of government. In the office of the Minister Zhenevok, a microphone was discovered, placed into his telephone on the work desk. It gave access to tap not only his telephone line conversations, but also everything that was being said around in closed meetings and candid conversations. I became suspicious that these walls have ears, said Yezhenov, when I heard someone quoting me on a phrase from the context of a very private conversation. The Minister of Justice demanded from the head of security that the walls be quickly investigated, and these bugs were recovered from the telephone. Who installed them and when, and to whom was the information being relayed? Answers to these questions will come through the investigation, which has begun by the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Its head, Jan Rumel, has categorically denied the participation of the Ministry of Internal Affairs in this action. The police have taken an inventory of all its listening devices, and it turns out that all its bugs were accounted for. However, where did it come to be? In the office of the Minister of Justice. While this deep story is waiting for to be resolved, Polish special services are checking all government phones and offices in the government buildings of the Republic. A regular scandal has happened in Estonia. This time, it is in the publishing industry regarding the privatization of the newspaper Rafael, which is known as the Voice of the People. This major paper is known for its very independent course in its publications. Not once on its pages there are statistics on the low standard of living in the Republic, and also the activity of the ruling right coalition party was criticized. This, of course, could not have been pleasing to the government, and they decided to privatize the national newspaper. However, the news of this elicited a loud outcry from the readers, especially when it was announced that the bid was won by an auctioneer society closely intertwined with government circles. The readers saw in this an attempt to close their paper down, and the editors received thousands of letters of protest, and the government was forced to stop the process of privatization. And what this will all end with is difficult to predict. Only one thing is clear, that this time the paper, The Voice of the People, was saved really by the voice of the people. Today, the head of the Catholic Church, John Paul II, welcomed the head rabbi of Israel, Marilau. This was the first historical meeting between the Vicar of the Cross and the head of the Judean community of Israel. Talks were conducted in very friendly atmosphere. The government of Honduras has appealed to the international community to provide assistance in the wake of the tropical storm Gert. Most assistance is needed to purchase medications and to avert epidemics. Locusts have invested the Indian state of Rajasthan. This is the greatest attack of locusts in 15 years. Authorities have appealed for help to the United Nations, which has supplied India with the necessary equipment. The 11-year-old American Victoria Van Miller will be the youngest pilot in the United States who will fly from the west to the east coast of the continent. She will be accompanied by an experienced instructor on the flight who said that Victoria will operate the plane on her own. The Russian fans of Mstislav Rostropovich will soon meet with the maestro. Today, the famous musician is flying from Washington to Moscow. I am going there with the orchestra with a feeling that we all, Americans and the orchestra and the choir, wish to play Russian music to show what a great nation the Russian people are. Mstislav Rostropovich, the American National Symphony of the United States, and the Washington Choral Society are going to Russia. The Russian people are great. This was said in Washington at the celebrations honoring Rostropovich. The congressmen, politicians, and all of this, the cream of society in the capital. Such a compliment Washington had not seen in a long time. The evening was organized by the Fund of the Russian-American Cultural Cooperation. The ambassador, Vadim Lukin, read a greeting from President Yeltsin, which includes words such as, "I'm convinced that your tour to Russia will not only be a cultural, but a politically and socially significant event." Politics is an art, but is the reverse true? Is art politics? Does Rostropovich have the impression that they're trying to make a politician out of him, a musician? No, I would say that I don't have this impression at all, because each artist must love his audience without regard for their lifestyle. Russia has given America wealth. Rachmaninov, Sikorsky, Zorkin, Leontiev, Balanchine. Such new names among them is Rostropovich, for he now has a medal for contributing to cultural work of Russia and the United States. The other medal will be the Russian people. Welcome him, Rostropovich and the National Symphony Orchestra of the United States. Today in the Central House of Art there was an exhibit which opened of the 17th to 20th century Russian art, which can be called a real sensation. It was organized by the auction house Alpha Art and measures up to any gallery. The auction is supposed to be held on the 25th of September, and this is no sensation because art auctions have long become part of our life. There's no need to speak of the value of these creations from private collections. The names of Korovin, Kustodiev, Falk speak for themselves. And the great sensation is the picture of Viktor Osintsov, the knight on the charger. Don't be afraid. The original knight, which you know, is in the Russian Museum in Petersburg. And this is another author's variation of the same picture, which he did in the year 1919. And what is the fate of this knight? And my colleague from the public newspaper Culture said and shared my opinion that I know that there are many companies that are interested in art, just as this very same Alpha Bank, which is assisting financially. And I know that many of them support the field by buying these works from the artists and by doing so helping them financially. And why wouldn't any such organization make a gift to Moscow or to the Tretyakov Gallery, for instance, any type of work of art, which, for example, the famous sketches of von Sentsov, one of the investors said, "I would like to become a part of the native culture of Russia." And here is a chance. We will wait till the 25th of September, and then we will see. And so these are the main events, and soon you will see the news of sport. And with this, I say goodbye to you.
Американского журнала Newsweek МММ является сегодня самой перспективной российской компанией. Стоимость ваучера, вложенного в МММ Инвест, возросла в 87,2 раза. Основной капитал, зарегистрированный в госкомимуществе, 102 миллиарда рублей. Ставьте на лидера.
Фирма Swiss Invest откроет секретные номерные счета в швейцарском банке и разместит ваши валютные депозиты под 12-15% годовых. Гарантируется полный финансовый сервис, в том числе выдача золотых кредитных карточек. Солидных клиентов просим звонить в наше восточноевропейское бюро. Там говорят по-русски. Серьезные деньги выбирают Швейцарию.
Сегодня московская недвижимость является одним из самых выгодных способов вложения ваших приватизационных чеков и денежных средств. По оценкам западных экспертов, 1 рубль, вложенный в московскую недвижимость, стоит не менее $5. Где бы вы ни жили, московская недвижимость обеспечит вам постоянный и стабильный доход. В любое время, в любом почтовом отделении России вы можете стать владельцем акций московской недвижимости. Московская недвижимость всегда в цене.
In the Olympic events which are developing in these September days, unfolding on the backdrop of athletic and political passions as well, 5 cities of Olympic contenders are already on the finish lines. Good evening. About the coming 23rd of September competitions, we will speak later, but now the daily chronicle of the sports. The 1996 Olympic Games in the U.S. city Atlanta have not yet opened, but already 3,617 athletes have entered to be among the competitors. In London, the 7th game for the chess championship is underway, and between Garry Kasparov and Nigel Short. And I will remind you also that the 9th game between Anatoly Karpov and Jan Timmins has ended in Holland in a tie. The world champion from Finland, Juha Kanker, is candidate number 1 for the Australian Rally Championships. He there has beat another Finnish racer, Ari Vatanov, who is driving the Japanese car Subaru. At the Russian Hockey Championships, there are 2 clubs currently competing, the Moscow Dynamos and the Metallurgists. 6 matches, 6 victories. Today, between the Omsk Avangard and the Minsk team, the score was 6-1. And still on the agenda of the day is the choosing of the host city for the 2000 Olympic Games. In the battle demands a very high level of representation, apparently. And so, therefore, the Free Democrats of Germany have appealed to the Federal Chancellor Helmut Kohl to represent Berlin at the sessions. The Prime Minister of Britain, John Major, will head the delegation from Manchester. The London clubs predicted Peking a success, by the way. In Turkey, representing Istanbul will be another Premier Tansu Çiller, and Paul Keating, the Prime Minister of Australia, will naturally be balloting for Sydney. The Australians awaited the winner of the marathon of the London, Sydney, and the Russian racers as well. We've taken some shots of Sydney and the Olympic city for our Channel 1 viewers. The city on the west coast of Australia is firmly intending to win in the competition for Olympic capitals. The magnificent infrastructure of the Olympic pavilions, the wonderful climate, and the immaculate city gives hopes to the residents of the city and the organizers for the grandiose idea on the 23rd of September. This is a grandiose idea, and Australians and we, especially the athletes, support it, said one of their best, Arnold Brooke. These 2 older Australians were present at the 1956 Australian Games, and they reminisce over their memories. It is, of course, difficult to win in the Olympic competitions, and this was a careful assessment made by this very nice character, and otherwise he said welcome. Well, all we can do is wish welcome to all the candidates and success, and may the strongest win. And in closing, we would like to congratulate our Russian athlete, Vyacheslav Konutkin, who is the strongest weightlifter in Europe and has won in the heavy athletics competitions in Valencia. Information for Itartas Sport will be on Channel 1 later.
Конечно, другие-то есть, а счастливые только
Сникерс. Батончик из молочного шоколада. Жареный арахис и мягкая карамель. Сникерс – это лучший способ утолить голод.
Интеркоммерц. Все, абсолютно все для организации торговли. Вас ждет небывалый успех, если вы доверите дизайн и оснащение вашего магазина фирме Интеркоммерц. Торговое оборудование ведущих мировых фирм. Гарантия, сервис, расходные материалы. Заруби. Звоните в Москве 150 98 57, в Санкт-Петербурге 234 37 82. Приезжайте, мы ждем вас.
Это пункт приема ваучеров фонда МММ Инвест. Но стоять в очереди вовсе не обязательно. Отныне вы можете обменять свой ваучер на акции фонда в любом почтовом отделении России. Сделайте ваш ваучер золотым.
Respected fellow citizens, I address you during one of the most complex and responsible moments. Last night's events are of extreme significance. During the last months, Russia is experiencing a deep crisis of statehood. The fruitless, pointless battle of destruction involves literally all government institutions and political activists. The direct result of this is the reducing of the authority of the government and government in general. I'm sure all the citizens of Russia have become convinced that in such circumstances it is impossible to not only conduct the most difficult reforms, but also support elementary order. One must state directly, if an end is not brought to political rivalry within the Russian government, if one can restore the normal rhythm of its work and not maintain control of the situation, not preserve our country, not preserve peace in Russia. I am being swamped by demands from all ends of our country to stop the dangerous development of events, to stop the ridiculing of the rule of the people. Now, for more than 1 year, attempts were being made to find a compromise with the body of deputies, with the Supreme Soviet. Russians know well how many steps were made by me on the last councils and between them. And even if there was a possibility to reach any type of understanding, within a short time a categorical refusal would follow to fulfill the previously accepted obligations. We together had hoped that the climax would have passed after the April referendum, at which time the citizens of Russia had supported the president and the course he was conducting. Alas, this did not occur. During the last few days, our hopes have finally been dashed to revive any type of constructive cooperation. The majority of the Supreme Soviet is on a direct course to squelch the will of the Russian people. A course of intentional weakening is being pursued, and in the final stages, the dismissal of the president and the disorganization of the work of the current government. A major propaganda campaign has been unfurled to totally discredit all the executive branch of government in Russia. To date, the decisions of the Supreme Soviet and the Council have not been abolished, which contradict the results of the April referendum. And today, one may confidently say they will not be abolished. On the contrary, during the last months, prepared and adopted are tens of new anti-national decisions, many of them intentionally planned to worsen the situation in Russia. The most blatant are the so-called economic policy of the Supreme Soviet. Its decision on the budget, privatization, and many other issues deepens the crisis and brings great damage to the country. All efforts of the government to somehow alleviate the economic situation have been meeting with a deaf wall where there is no understanding. There was not even a sequence of a few days when the Soviet of ministers were not persecuting and their arms twisted, and this in the climate of a most serious economic crisis. The Supreme Soviet has stopped giving consideration to the decrees of the president, with the amendments to the law projects, and even with the constitutional right of veto. In the meantime, they are ceaselessly swearing allegiance to the Constitution and to the legislation. Constitutional reform has, in a sense, been derailed. In April of last year, the Sixth Council of National Deputies not only ratified the basic positions of the new Constitution, but also resolved to complete the work in view of the proposals and suggestions of the President of the Russian Federation, the heads of the project of the legislative power, and the President of the Russian Federation, the federal executive power. According to logic, the Seventh Council should have adopted the new constitution for the country, but the heads of the Supreme Soviet, without any apparent reasons or explanations, halted the constitutional process. And more than that, recently the Supreme Soviet prepared a proposed to me to approve the actual deposition of the elected president. Namely, this is the meaning of the amendments to the Constitution which I recently received from the White House. One must admit the process of creating a lawful government in Russia, in essence, has been disorganized. And on the contrary, a conscious watering down is underway of an already weak judicial basis of the young Russian nation. The law drafting work has become a weapon of political battle. The laws for which Russia has a dire need are not adopted for years. Instead, a revision from the very root has begun of the active constitution and the adopted legislative acts. They are being rewritten to benefit fleeting political moods. This damaging practice has been adopted of judicial arbitrariness, the essence of which in the primitive form is whatever law we want to adopt, we will adopt. What we want, that we will write down. And the further we go, the more confusion, the broader the arena for abuse. All this has nothing in common with the lawfulness nor the law. Something cannot be considered to be a law which contradicts the fundamental foundations of law and violates the elementary freedoms and rights of humans and the basic democratic principles. Such law is not yet a law, especially if it is dictated by one person or by a group of persons. It has been a long time since the majority of sessions of the Supreme Soviet is conducted in violation of elementary procedures of Parliament. Open demonstrative cheating at voting is a daily phenomenon. The participants of the sessions, in the presence of the entire world, cast votes for the absent through several card systems. And each such fact is a shame. It is discreditation of the very foundations of Parliament. Purges of committees and commissions are underway from the Supreme Soviet, its Presidium, and mercilessly all are expelled who do not demonstrate personal loyalty to his superior. That about which I speak is not an accidental occurrence, not a growth pain. All of this is bitter evidence of the fact that the Supreme Soviet, as a government institution, is in a condition now of political decomposition. It has lost its ability to fulfill the main functions of a representative body, the function of coordinating social interests. It has stopped being an organ of the rule of the people. The power in the Russian Supreme Soviet has been seized by a group of persons who have turned it into the headquarters of relentless opposition. And hiding behind the backs of deputies, being parasites on the collective responsibility, holding secret votes. It pushes Russia to the edge of the abyss. To not notice this, to tolerate and remain idle, is no longer possible. My responsibility as the President is to admit that the current legislative body has squandered its right to be present at the most important levers of government power. The safety of Russia and its people is a more a more precious treasure than the formal adherence to contradictory norms created by a legislative power which has in full discredited itself. The time has come for most serious decisions to be made. Respected fellow citizens, the only way to overcome the paralysis of power in Russia and the Russian Federation is its basic renovation on the basis of the principles of the rule of the people and constitutionality. The current constitution does not permit this to be done. The current constitution does not provide for a procedure to adopt a new constitution wherein a worthy solution out of a government crisis could be foreseen. As the guarantor of the safety of our nation, I am obligated to propose a solution and to tear apart this destructive circle. Considering the many appeals made to me, the heads of the subjects of the Russian Federation, the circle of deputies, participants of the Constitutional Council, political parties, movements, representatives of societies, citizens of Russia, I have taken the following action. Empowered by the national elections in 1991, the confidence which was reaffirmed by the citizens of Russia during the referendum in April of 1993, I have confirmed in my decree the amendments and the amendments to the existing constitution of the Russian Federation, which regard mainly the federal organs of legislative and executive government, their interrelations on the basis of the principle of division of power. The highest body of legislative power will be the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, a two-house parliament working on a professional basis. The elections have been set for the 11th and 12th of December of this year. I emphasize, these are not premature elections of the Council and the Supreme Soviet. A new high organ is being created of judicial power of Russia. Any actions directed at cancelling the elections are deemed unlawful, and persons permitting them will be held criminally responsible on the basis of the Criminal Code of Russia. Into Russian Parliament there must come people who will not play political games at the expense of the people, but first of all, to establish laws so necessary for Russia. Into Russian Parliament, people must come who are more competent, more cultured, more democratic. I believe that there are such people in Russia. I believe that we together will find and elect them. In the recreation of the federal power of Russia, I don't seek any personal gain and make no exceptions for myself personally as the President of the Russian Federation. I support that after the work of the Federal Assembly has begun, early elections for the office of President be held, and only you, the voters, must decide who will occupy this highest government post of Russia for the usual term. Pursuant to the decree of the President, which has already been signed, starting today, I disband the judicial, instructional, and controlling functions of the Council of the People's Deputies and the Supreme Soviet of the Russian Federation. The meetings of the Council will not be further convened. The powers of the national deputies of the Russian Federation will cease. Of course, their labor rights will be fully guaranteed. The deputies are within their rights to return to the enterprises and institutions where they worked prior to being elected deputies of Russia and to occupy their former positions. At the same time, each of them is again within his power, within his right to submit his candidacy for elections to the Federal Assembly. The power of the organs on locations will be preserved. In connection with this, I address the local authorities. Use all your legal possibilities to ensure social order. I wish to note that the Constitution of the Russian Federation, the legislature of the Russian Federation, and the subjects of the Russian Federation will continue to function in its full sense in view of the amendments and additions pursuant to the decree of the President. Guaranteed by the ratified Constitution and the law are the rights and freedoms of the citizens of the Russian Federation. I address the heads of foreign countries and to foreign citizens, our friends, of whom there are many across the entire world. Your support is significant and precious for Russia. At the most critical moments of the most complicated Russian changes, you were with us. We call upon you again this time, under this complexity, to understand the situation in the country and the measures which I, as the President of the Russian Federation, am forced to follow. That this is the only path of defending democracy and freedom in Russia, the protection of reforms of our yet weak Russian market. These measures are indispensable to protect Russia and the world from catastrophic repercussions of the collapse of Russian statehood, from the enthronement of anarchy in the country with a huge arsenal of nuclear armaments. I have no other goal. Respectful fellow countrymen, the moment has come when, with our combined efforts, we can and must put an end to the deep crisis of Russian statehood. I count on your understanding and your help. I count on your wisdom and loyalty to the country. We have a chance to help Russia. I believe that we will use it for the sake of peace and well-being in our country, for the sake of expelling from Russia the excruciating battle from which we have all grown weary. With our common strength, we will preserve Russia for us, for our children and grandchildren. Thank you. Good evening. In Efir, the evening news from Ostankino. Exactly 1 hour ago, the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, addressed by way of television the citizens of the Russian Federation in connection with the most serious power crisis in the country. Pursuant to the decree of the President, which has already been signed, starting today, I disband the judicial, instructional, controlling functions of the Council of People's Deputies and of the Supreme Soviet of the Russian Federation. The meetings of the Council will not be further convened. The powers of the national deputies of the Russian Federation will cease. Of course, their labor rights will be fully guaranteed. The deputies are within their rights to return to the enterprises and institutions where they worked prior to having been elected deputies of Russia, to occupy their former posts. At the same time, each is again within his right to submit his candidacy for elections